At 6:47 in the morning on February 17, 1940, a 19-year-old soldier named Alexei Sorokin stepped into a forest that would kill him in 4 minutes. He did not know this. He knew the temperature, minus 43 degrees Celsius. Cold that did not feel like cold anymore. Cold that felt like pressure, like the air itself was pressing against your skin, trying to get inside you, trying to find the warmth you were hiding and take it. He knew his boots were wet. He had stepped through a thin patch of ice crossing a stream 2 kilometers back, and the water had soaked through his felt lining, and now his left foot had gone from painful to numb, which was worse. Numb meant you stopped feeling it. Numb meant you stopped checking it. Numb was how men lost toes in Finnish forests in February. He knew the names of the 10 men walking behind him. Stepan, who was from a village outside Minsk and talked too much when he was nervous. Grigory, who had a wife and a new baby he had never seen, born 3 weeks after the invasion started. Pavel, who was 22 and had been a school teacher and quoted Pushkin to himself under his breath when things got difficult. 10 men. Alexei was the youngest. He was walking in front, which meant he was the one who would see any threat first. He did not see the threat. The threat had been watching him for 11 minutes. This is the thing about the Finnish forest in February 1940 that the Soviet military briefings had failed to convey to Alexei Sorokin and the 10 men behind him. The forest was not empty. It looked empty. From where Alexei was walking, suddenly it was all white and shadow and the vertical lines of birch trunks, silent, still, containing nothing that moved. That was the appearance. The reality was different. The reality was that the forest was organized, that every clearing and rise and depression in it had been assigned a purpose by a mind that had been working in these particular kilometers of Finnish ground for 60 days, and that the organized forest was now waiting for Alexei to walk to a specific point in it that Alexei could not see and could not know, and would never, in the 4 minutes remaining to him, have any chance to avoid. 220 meters north, in a depression in the snow between two fallen birch trees, a man lay completely still. He had been in this position since before dawn. 4 hours in the same place, in the same posture, controlling his breathing, controlling his heartbeat, waiting. The snow around him was undisturbed except where he had carefully packed it against his body. His white camouflage uniform had been in this position so long it had begun to take on the temperature of the snow itself. A Soviet scout passing within 30 meters would not have seen him. No Soviet scout had ever seen him. His name was Esko Makinen. He was 34 years old. He stood 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 150 pounds. He was a farmer. Before the war, before any of this, he had grown rye and potatoes on land his father rented near the Russian border. He had never wanted to be a soldier. He had never wanted to kill anyone. But the Soviet Union had invaded his country, and Esko Makinen was very, very good at killing. Through iron sights, he watched Alexei Sorokin walk toward him. 160 meters, 150, 140. Before we follow that bullet to its destination, you need to understand something that the Soviet Union never fully understood. Something that cost them 542 men before they came close to figuring it out. The Soviet 155th Rifle Division's intelligence report, filed on January 3, 1940, described the enemy sniper threat in the Kola sector as follows: a coordinated team of 6 to 8 Finnish marksmen operating in rotating positions. Estimated kills to date, 214. Threat level, critical, 6 to 8 men. That was the only explanation that made mathematical sense to the Soviet intelligence officers analyzing the casualty reports. The kill rate was too high. Either the positions were too varied. The shots came from different angles, different ranges, different times of day. No single human being could be responsible for this. No single human being could kill at this rate, move this fast, remain this invisible for this long. They were wrong. It was one man, one farmer, 5 feet 3 inches tall, who had learned to shoot because if he missed, his family ate less that winter. That was the whole secret. That was all of it. Not military training, not special equipment, not some rare genetic gift for violence. A boy who grew up hungry in a cold place where missing a shot had real consequences. a boy who spent 14 years learning the forest around his village, the way other men learn the faces of their children. A boy who became a man and then became something the Soviet Union had no category for. But to understand Esko Makinen, you have to go back to a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. Rutjärvi, Finland. Population 380. One general store, one Lutheran church. No school past 8th grade, no electricity, no running water. The nearest city was 30 kilometers away, which in winter meant a half-day's journey by horse through snow that could reach a man's waist. Esko was born there in 1905, second oldest of 8 children. His father, Paavo, was a tenant farmer. He did not own his land. He rented 150 acres from a landowner who lived in Helsinki and had never seen the property. The arrangement was simple and brutal. Half the harvest went to the landowner. The other half fed 8 children through a 7-month winter. Money was something other people had. The Makinen family had land, work, and each other. Most years that was enough, but most years was not every year, and in the years when the rye came up thin, when the early frost hit before September, when the hay harvest fell short, the winter got very long and the meals got very small. Esko understood hunger before he understood most things. He also understood the forest. The forests around Rutjärvi were old-growth pine and birch and spruce, dense enough in places that sunlight never reached the ground. The snow under those trees was different from the snow in the open fields. It compacted differently. It held tracks differently. It made different sounds under a boot at different temperatures. The forest had its own logic, has its own language, and Paavo Makinen had grown up speaking it, and he taught it to his son. Esko was 6 years old the winter his father first took him hunting. The snow was waist-deep on Esko. He could barely walk. His father carried the rifle, a single-shot .22 caliber, bought used from a neighbor for 3 Finnish marks. The stock was cracked. The sights were slightly bent from being dropped, but it fired. That was the only criterion that mattered. They walked for an hour without speaking. This was not unusual. Paavo Makinen was not a talkative man. He communicated in actions, in gestures, in the quality of his attention. When he stopped walking and stood very still, Esko stopped too. When his father's hand went up, Esko froze. 200 meters away, at the edge of a clearing, a bull elk stood in the thin winter light. 300 kilograms, the largest animal Esko had ever seen up close. Big enough to feed the family for 3 weeks. Big enough to change the shape of the entire winter. Paavo handed Esko the rifle without a word. Esko looked at his father. His father looked at the elk. The rifle was so heavy Esko couldn't hold it unsupported. He found a fallen log, rested the barrel on it. The elk was a brown shape against white snow. He could see the shoulder, the thick neck, the steam rising from the animal's nostrils. He put the front sight on the shoulder. His hands were shaking from the cold and from something else, something he didn't have a word for yet. His father said one thing: "If you miss the shot, the family eats less this week." Esko held his breath. Put the sight where he wanted the bullet to go. He squeezed the trigger the way his father had shown him once, just once, 3 days earlier. The rifle kicked. His shoulder exploded in pain. He fell backward into the snow. When he sat up, the elk was down. His father walked to the animal, checked the wound. 1 shot, clean kill. Heart and lungs. The elk had been dead before it hit the ground. Paavo said nothing. He took out his knife and began the work of dressing the animal. Approval was not words in the Makinen household. Approval was the family eating well that week. Approval was his mother's face when his father came through the door pulling a sled loaded with meat. That was how Esko Makinen learned to shoot. Not for sport, not for competition, not because someone told him to, for survival, because the alternative to making the shot was a family that went to bed hungry. That lesson embedded itself somewhere deep in him, in a place below conscious thought, in the place where instinct lives. It would stay there for the next 28 years, through civil guard service and shooting competitions and a war that nobody wanted, all the way to a snowdrift in February 1940, where he lay waiting for Soviet soldiers with the same calm his father had taught him beside a dead elk in a winter forest. Between age 6 and age 20, Esko entered those forests more than 4,000 times. 4,000 mornings, 4,000 returns, through every season, in every condition, in every quality of light and darkness. He learned that forest the way a scholar learns a text, not just its surface meaning, but its deep structure, its patterns, its exceptions, its silences. And he knew where the elk bedded during the day and where they moved at dusk. He knew which game trails were used in early winter when the snow was shallow and which routes the deer switched to when the drifts deepened. He knew the sound the forest made when it was empty and the different, subtler sound it made when something large was moving through it 300 meters away. He knew which trees held snow on their branches and which shed it at the slightest vibration. He knew which clearings caught the morning light and which stayed in shadow until noon. By age 12, he could shoot a running fox at 400 meters. That is not a figure of speech. A running fox at 400 meters is a moving target approximately 30 centimeters across, at a range where wind drift and bullet drop require precise calculation. She compensated in real time, while the target is moving unpredictably. Most trained military snipers with modern equipment would consider that shot difficult. Esko Makinen was making it at age 12 with a second-hand rifle and bent sights. By age 16, he could remain motionless in minus 30-degree cold for 4 hours. Not because he didn't feel it, he felt it. The cold was real and it was constant and it was painful in the particular way that deep cold becomes painful after the first hour, when it stops being a sensation and becomes a presence, something alive and persistent that wants your core temperature. He felt all of that. He simply did not move. He had learned through repetition, through the pure empirical education of doing something thousands of times, that the animal he was waiting for would eventually step into the position he needed. His only job was to be still until it did. Patience for Esko was not a virtue. It was a technique. By age 20, he was the best hunter in Rutjärvi, and everyone in the village knew it. Other hunters asked him how he made shots they couldn't make, how he saw animals they couldn't see, how he stayed still so long. Esko's answer was always the same word: practice. People thought he was being modest or cryptic or simply not very articulate. They were wrong. Practice was the complete and accurate answer. Not talent, not some mystical gift. 4,000 repetitions in the same forests, in the same conditions, across 14 years. The brain encodes what the body repeats. Esko's nervous system had been calibrated by 14 years of real stakes hunting, and the result was a human being who could do things that looked impossible to people who hadn't put in the same repetitions. But the practice had given him something beyond marksmanship, something harder to name and harder to replicate. He could memorize terrain, not just remember it in the general way people remember places they've been. Memorize it. Every tree, every rock formation, every depression in the ground, every place where two trails crossed, where a stream bent, where the tree line broke and exposed an open field. When Esko walked through a section of forest, he built a three-dimensional map in his mind, precise and detailed, and that map did not fade. Weeks later, months later, while he could return to that section of forest and navigate it in complete darkness, knowing exactly where each obstacle was, where the ground dropped away, where the ice was thin over the stream. More importantly, he knew when something had changed. If a branch had broken since his last visit, he knew. If an animal had disturbed the snow under a particular tree, he knew. If someone had moved through an area and tried to erase the evidence, he knew, because the forest he remembered did not match the forest in front of him. This skill, this specific skill that Esko developed, hunting elk in Finnish forests, would later kill 140 Soviet soldiers who tried to conceal artillery positions in terrain he had memorized. They hid their guns in forests. Esko knew those forests. He knew something was wrong before he could articulate what. He would find the guns and report them, and Finnish artillery would destroy them, and the Soviet crews would die never knowing how they had been found. In 1925, Esko turned 20, and Finland had a law. Every male citizen at age 21 was required to serve 1 year in the Suojeluskunta, the Civil Guard, a volunteer defense organization that trained Finnish civilians for war. Finland expected war. Russia had controlled Finland for over 100 years before 1917, before the Russian Revolution, before Lenin's chaos gave Finland its opening to declare independence. The Soviet Union had been making its intentions clear since the moment Finland became a separate nation. Everyone understood that the question was not whether Russia would try to take Finland back. The question was when. So every Finnish male trained, learned to shoot, learned to move through forests, learned to fight with the resources available, which were limited because Finland was a small country with no tanks and no heavy artillery and no air force worth mentioning. What Finland had was forests and men who knew how to use them. Esko reported to Civil Guard service in April 1925. The training focused primarily on marksmanship. Finnish military doctrine was built around a simple and honest assessment. They could not match the Soviet Union in equipment or numbers. They could match them and potentially exceed them in individual soldier effectiveness in forested terrain. Every soldier had to qualify at 3 distances: 150 meters, 300 meters, 500 meters. Esko qualified at 500 meters with 72% accuracy. His instructors had never seen scores like that. At 300 meters, he was at 89%. At 150, 97. The company commander called him in and asked how he shot so well. Esko said, "Practice." The commander said everyone practiced. What made Esko different? Esko thought about it. Then he said something his instructor wrote verbatim in his service record. "I see what is there, not what I expect to see." He meant this. Most shooters aim at an idea of the target. They have decided in advance where they think the target is, how they expect it to be positioned. They are shooting at their expectation. Esko aimed at the actual target, exactly where it actually was, with no preconception filtering his perception. He completed his service in November 1926 and returned to farming. Now here is the twist that his shooting competitors never understood, the one that made his record possible. For the next 13 years, Esko attended shooting competitions. Local matches at first, then regional, then national. He competed with the same Mosin Nagant M28/30 rifle he had used in Civil Guard service. Most of his competitors used scopes, German optics, Zeiss glass, 8 power, 10 power, 12 power magnification. They had spent significant money on equipment specifically to win these competitions. Esko used iron sights, and he won anyway. Between 1926 and 1939, he won 17 regional championships and 4 national championships. Every single one with iron sights. His competitors asked him year after year why he refused a scope. Esko's answer never changed: "I see better without them." People thought he was joking. He was not. Here is what Esko understood from 14 years of hunting animals that would survive if they detected him and die if they didn't. Scopes fog in extreme cold. At -20, -30, the lens temperature differential creates condensation inside the tube. Your scope goes white at the moment you need it most. Esko had watched other hunters lose shots because their scope fogged at the critical moment. He had never lost a shot to a fogged iron sight. Scopes create glare. Sunlight hitting a glass lens produces a flash visible at 300 meters. In the hunting ground, that flash meant the elk saw you and ran. In the killing ground, that flash meant the enemy saw you and shot back. Because scopes require you to raise your head higher above the ground, creating a larger silhouette, more of you visible to anyone watching. And scopes were slower. 1.3 seconds slower, on average, from target acquisition to firing. In a firefight, 1.3 seconds is enough time for the other man to fire first. Esko could acquire a target and fire in 1.5 seconds with iron sights. The average for a scope-equipped sniper was 2.8 seconds. He had been proving this difference in shooting competitions for 13 years before anyone pointed a weapon at him. Think about that number for a moment. 1.3 seconds. It is a blink and a half. It is the time it takes to say a short word. In ordinary life, it is nothing. In the context of 2 trained men trying to kill each other at close range, it is the entire difference between going home and not going home. Esko had looked at the equipment every other shooter was using and understood, with the clear-eyed practicality of a man who had grown up where mistakes had consequences, that the equipment was making them slower. They were paying money to be slower. They had convinced themselves that the magnification was worth the cost. that seeing the target larger compensated for the time it took to acquire the sight picture through a tube. Esko had run the calculation and reached a different conclusion 14 years before the war gave him the opportunity to prove it. November the 30th, 1939. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Soviet artillery began shelling the Finnish border. Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov announced that Finland had fired first. It was a lie, a staged provocation, fabricated from beginning to end. Stalin wanted Finnish territory. He had demanded Finland's cede land near Leningrad. Finland refused. Stalin was not a man accustomed to being refused. The Red Army deployed 1 million soldiers, 3,000 tanks, 2,500 aircraft. Finland's entire military numbered 300,000 soldiers, no tanks, 114 aircraft, most of them obsolete. The world's military analysts predicted Finnish surrender in a week. Some said 3 days. The Soviet soldiers heading toward the Finnish border expected to be home by Christmas. They were badly mistaken. There is a parallel here that every American man who has ever put on a uniform will recognize. The numbers said Finland should have surrendered. And the numbers were overwhelming and unambiguous, and everyone reading them reached the same conclusion. What the numbers did not say, what they could not say, was what happens when you are fighting on your own ground for your own home against an enemy, fighting for an abstraction called strategic advantage. The Finns were not fighting for Stalin's idea of what Finland should contribute to Soviet security. They were fighting for the farm and the church and the creek that froze in October. They were fighting for the specific and irreplaceable. The Soviets were fighting for coordinates on a map. That difference does not show up in any military strength comparison. It showed up in the forests around the Kola River for 98 days in the winter of 1939 and 1940, and it showed up later at the Chosin Reservoir and in the Ayadrang Valley, and in every other place in history where men who knew exactly what they were fighting for faced men who were following orders from somewhere else. Esko received his mobilization order at noon on November 30th, delivered by courier to his farm while he was repairing a fence. He read the notice twice, set it on the kitchen table, went inside and began packing. His Mosin Nagant M28/30, 400 rounds of ammunition, white winter camouflage, wool socks 3 pairs, dried meat, black bread, 2 canteens. He moved through the house with the methodical economy of a man who had spent his life preparing for hard winters. His mother cried. His father stood in the yard, shook Esko's hand, said one thing: "Do your duty." Esko arrived at the Civil Guard assembly point in the afternoon. His old unit was reforming as the 6th Company, Infantry Regiment 34. 160 men. Captain Juhani Korhonen briefed them standing in a snowy yard at -25. "You are going to the Kola River sector. The Soviets are advancing from the east. If they cross the Kola River, they advance to Viipuri. If Viipuri falls, Finland falls. Your mission is simple. Stop them. Kill everyone who tries to cross. Do not allow them to advance." On December 7th, the Soviets attacked. 14,000 Soviet soldiers against 4,000 Finnish defenders. Soviet military doctrine was built on mass. Send enough men forward and some will reach the objective. The first wave crossed the frozen Kola at 6:30 in the morning. Now Finnish Maxim machine guns opened fire. 800 Soviet soldiers died in the first hour. The second wave attacked at 9. 600 more died. The third wave at 11. 500 more. By nightfall, 2,400 Soviet soldiers were dead. Finnish casualties, 68. The exchange ratio was 35-1. The Soviets had tanks. They had artillery. They had air support. None of it mattered. The forest was too dense for armor. The artillery couldn't locate Finnish positions through the trees. The aircraft couldn't bomb what they couldn't see. Esko participated in that first battle as a standard rifleman, but he noticed something that would change everything. Soviet soldiers moved predictably. They followed roads and established trails. They bunched together in groups. They exposed themselves in open areas, standing upright, walking across clearings that any experienced hunter would have skirted. They did not use terrain. They moved like animals that had never been hunted, which meant they moved like animals that were easy to kill. After the battle, Esko found Captain Korhonen. "I can kill more Soviets alone than in a squad. Let me operate as a marksman. I know how to move in these forests." I have been doing this since I was 6 years old. Coronen studied him, looked at the service record, exceptional marksmanship scores, national shooting champion, the note about seeing what is there rather than what he expected. He looked at Esko's face, which was calm in a way that most men's faces were not calm in the 24 hours after their first major battle. He approved the request. On December 9th, 1939, Esko Mäkinen became a designated marksman. He would operate independently, select his own positions, engage targets of opportunity. No squad, no spotter, just one man and one rifle, and the forest he had spent his entire life learning. He went out before dawn the next morning, December 10th, 5 o'clock, temperature -38. He moved through darkness towards Soviet positions, finding his ground, building his position with the care of someone who understood that position was everything. He developed his system through the first days. First, he cleared the snow from in front of his rifle muzzle. When a rifle fires, the muzzle blast kicks up snow and creates a visible white cloud. Clear the snow first and the blast dissipates into open air. No signal. Second, he packed snow tightly around his body, like leaving only his rifle barrel and his face exposed. He became part of the landscape. Third, he placed a small amount of snow in his mouth. This was his own discovery. At -40, human breath creates visible vapor, a small white cloud appearing at regular intervals with each exhale. Soviet counter-snipers were trained to watch for this. But if you held snow in your mouth, the snow kept your breath cold. No vapor formed. Soviet counter-snipers would spend hours searching for Esko, watching for breath vapor, finding nothing. Fourth, he established his escape route before he ever fired a shot. Memorized the path, the cover, every step, so when he needed to withdraw, he could do it without thinking. Fast, automatic. At 7:23 that first morning, a Soviet patrol appeared. 12 men, an officer organizing them at the tree line, visible through the birch trunks, exposed and unaware. Esko controlled his breathing, slow, steady. His heartbeat was 62 beats per minute, the same as when he woke up in the morning. He exhaled slowly. Between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The Mosin Nagant fired once. The sound carried through the cold air like a branch breaking. Nothing dramatic. The Soviet officer fell. The patrol scattered, took cover, shouted to each other. They had heard one shot. They did not know which direction to look, which direction to run, where the threat was coming from. Esko did not move, did not reload immediately, just watched. At 7:31, a soldier approached the dead officer, trying to help, trying to see if the man was still alive. Esko fired again. The soldier fell. The patrol ran east, away from the river, away from finish lines, away from whatever invisible thing was killing them. Esko remained in position for another hour. No more targets appeared. At 8:30, he withdrew. Reported to Captain Coronen. 2 confirmed kills. Range 250 meters. No enemy contact. No injuries. That evening, he opened a small notebook and wrote the date, the time, the range, the weather conditions. December 10th, 1939. 4 confirmed kills. He wrote it the way a farmer records his harvest yields. Clinical, methodical. December 11th. 6 confirmed kills. December 12th. 5 confirmed kills. The Soviet 155th Rifle Division was losing soldiers in the Kala sector and could not explain it. Patrols went out and came back short. Men were found dead with single gunshot wounds. No sounds of battle, no muzzle flashes observed, no indication of direction, just dead men in the snow, 1 bullet each. Soviet officers interrogated survivors. What happened? Where did the shot come from? Did anyone see anything? The survivors all said the same thing. We heard one shot. One of our men fell. We took cover. Sometimes another shot. Another man fell. We never saw the shooter. Never saw a muzzle flash. Never saw a movement. It was like being killed by something that wasn't there. The Soviet 155th Rifle Division gave the thing that wasn't there a name. Belaya Smrt. White Death. The name spread through the division the way fear spreads, person to person, trench to trench, whispered in the cold dark. Officers included it in their reports with the careful, neutral language of men trying not to admit they were afraid. Soldiers said it the way soldiers say things they cannot explain and cannot stop. White Death is operating in Sector 7. If you go into that forest, you might not come back. By December 22nd, ESCO had 87 confirmed kills. The Soviet 155th Rifle Division held a command meeting. The colonel looked at the casualty reports. 87 men in 2 weeks, all from sniper fire, all in the same sector. How many snipers? Intelligence estimates 6 to 8, Comrade Colonel. Then deploy counter-sniper teams. 12 specialists. Scoped rifles. Find these Finnish snipers. Kill all of them. They were sending specialists, trained counter-snipers, men who had killed snipers before, men who knew how to hunt hunters, but they were hunting the wrong thing. They thought they were hunting a team. And 8 kilometers away in a Finnish defensive position, Esko cleaned his rifle, ate black bread, checked his ammunition. He did not know counter-sniper teams were being deployed. He knew one thing. Tomorrow he would go into the forest again. He would find Soviet soldiers. He would kill them before they could kill Finns. That was his duty, nothing more, nothing less. By January 20th, the confirmed kill total stood at 112. 40 days of war. 112 Soviet soldiers who had gone into the Kala forest and not come back. The Soviet command held another meeting. The casualty reports were laid out on a folding table in a command tent that a single iron stove could not quite warm against the -35 air, pushing through every gap in the canvas. The colonel looked at the numbers. 112 dead in the Kala sector, all from sniper fire, all in the same general area. How many snipers, he asked again. Intelligence still says 6 to 8, Comrade Colonel. Deploy more counter-sniper specialists. Send the best we have. On February 3, 1940, Vasily Nikitin arrived at the Kala River sector. He was 32 years old, a career soldier since 1926. He had fought in the border conflicts with Japan in 1938 and 1939. He had 43 confirmed kills over 2 years of combat. He was patient. He was skilled. He was, by any honest assessment, one of the best counter-snipers in the Red Army. He had grown up in Moscow, the son of a factory foreman, educated in state schools that taught him to read well and think carefully and trust the system that surrounded him. He had joined the army at 18 because it was what young men did when they wanted a future larger than the factory floor. He had been good at the army from the start, good at marksmanship, good at fieldcraft, good at the patient, sustained attention that counter-sniper work required. He had a wife named Irina who taught primary school, 2 daughters, Anna, who was 8 and had her mother's serious eyes, and Maria, who was 5 and had her father's easy grin. He had last seen them in October, standing at the train station in the gray Moscow morning. Irina holding her coat closed against the wind, the girls on either side of her, Anna solemn, Maria waving until the platform disappeared. He carried 2 things in his coat pocket, his service journal, a small leather-bound notebook he had kept since his first deployment, and a photograph of his wife and daughter standing in front of their apartment building on the 3rd floor, smiling into the camera on a summer afternoon that seemed, in the Finnish winter, like something from another world entirely. Vasily was briefed by a lieutenant colonel who handed him the casualty reports. 147 kills, 43 days, 6 to 8 snipers operating as a coordinated team. 4 of our counter-sniper specialists killed attempting to locate them. 8 others returned without making contact. Vasily read through the reports without speaking. He read slowly and carefully, looking for the information behind the information, the pattern underneath the facts. Then he set the reports down and said, "Intelligence is wrong. This is not a team. This is one man." The lieutenant colonel stared at him. "And I have hunted coordinated sniper teams before," Vasily said. "They leave specific signatures, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated timing, variations in shooting style between different shooters. I see none of that here. Every kill in these reports reflects identical technique, same shot placement, same engagement ranges, same pattern of single shot followed by complete positional disappearance. One mind, one method, one shooter." The lieutenant colonel was quiet. "If you're right," he said, "what does that mean?" "It means we've been looking for a team," Vasily said. We've been thinking about how to counter 6 men. We should have been thinking about how to counter one man who shoots like 6 men. Those are completely different problems. That night, Vasily wrote in his journal, arrived Kola sector. Your intelligence assessment of 6 to 8 snipers is incorrect. Analysis of kill pattern indicates single shooter. One style, one mind. This is not a team operation. This is one man. I have hunted snipers before. I know what teams look like. This is different. Tomorrow I begin observation. I will find him. He was the only person on the Soviet side of the Kala River who understood what they were actually facing. That understanding would not save him. On February 5th, Vasily was in position at 230 meters from a trail gap, where the trees thinned and left an open section with no natural cover. He had arrived before 3 in the morning. At 7:10, Esko fired from a position 260 meters away. The Soviet soldier in the gap fell. Vasily swung his scope, scanned, looked for the shape that wasn't a tree. He had done this 1,000 times. He found nothing for 3 seconds. Then at the base of a fallen birch, he caught it. Not a shape, not movement. A tiny irregularity in the snow, a compression pattern that was fractionally wrong. He swung the scope and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. Snow erupted from the base of the birch. Finnish scouts checked the position 40 minutes later. They found 3 Soviet bullets embedded in packed snow. No blood, no body. Esko had fired once from the birch position and relocated 60 meters south before Vasily's rounds arrived. He had heard them impact. The sharp crack of high-velocity rounds, very close. This Soviet sniper was different. He had detected Esko within 3 seconds of firing, had fired within 3 seconds of detecting him. 3 seconds. That was the margin. When Vasily wrote that evening, I found his position. Fired. He was already gone. 3 seconds. He moves in 3 seconds. Normal snipers relocate in 30 seconds, maybe 20 if well-trained. This man relocates in 3. He has pre-planned his exit before he ever fires. His escape route is memorized, automatic, faster than thought. To kill him, I would need to fire before he fires. To fire before he fires, I would need to know where he is before he shoots. I do not know how to do that yet, but I am thinking about it. February 9th was the day the Soviets tried something different. An 8-man infiltration team moved through Finnish lines at 2 in the morning, using a gap in coverage that Soviet scouts had identified the previous week. They reached a trail intersection 300 meters behind Finnish defensive positions at 4 in the morning. They spread into the trees on both sides of the trail, invisible in white camouflage, weapons ready. Their orders were simple. White Death moves through this intersection before dawn every 3rd day. The pattern has been observed. Tomorrow is the 3rd day. When he appears, kill him. At 6:45, Esko approached from the north, moving toward his usual operational area, following a route he had used before. Passing through the intersection he had crossed a dozen times. He stopped. Something was wrong. He had been in these forests for 34 years. He knew how they sounded when they were empty. The forest had a texture to it, a presence made up of small animals moving and birds adjusting position in the particular way wind moved through different densities of trees. He had never consciously cataloged these things. He had simply absorbed them, the way you absorb the sounds of a house you've lived in for years, until silence in a room that should have sound becomes immediately noticeable. The intersection ahead was too quiet. No birds, no small animals. The snow around the intersection was too undisturbed. The forest at that intersection was holding its breath. When a forest holds its breath, a predator is near. Esko withdrew silently, stepped backward along his own tracks, slow, no sound. When he was 200 meters back, he turned and moved east, then south. An uri covering 400 meters in a wide arc that brought him to the intersection from the eastern side, moving through dense spruce that gave him cover until he was close enough to observe. He saw them. 8 Soviet soldiers in white camouflage positioned on both sides of the trail, watching north. Their backs were exposed to the east. They were watching the wrong direction because they had assumed he would take the route he had always taken. He had not taken it. Esko settled into position at the base of a spruce, 190 meters. He exhaled. Between heartbeats, he fired. The leftmost soldier fell without a sound. The team scrambled, spun, tried to locate the threat from the east, when everything they had been told said the threat would come from the north. Confusion bought seconds. Esko fired again before they resolved the confusion. A second soldier fell. The remaining 6 took cover, returned fire. Wild, panicked fire. Esko had already moved 40 meters north while they were still spinning. From his new position, he fired twice more. 2 more fell. 4 down. The remaining 4 ran west, away from the intersection, away from finish lines, away from whatever had turned their ambush into a disaster in 90 seconds. Vasily wrote, "He knew. Before he reached the intersection, he knew we were there. He circled 400 meters, came from behind, killed 4 men in 90 seconds while the team was still trying to understand what was happening. I am hunting a man who sees what I cannot see, who hears what I cannot hear, who thinks 3 steps ahead of me. He is not operating in this forest. He is part of it. Wei, I am a visitor. He is a resident. That difference cannot be overcome by technique." February 10th, Lieutenant Lebedev was 28 years old, an artillery officer with an engineering degree from the Leningrad Polytechnic Institute. He approached war as an equation. Every problem had a correct solution if you identified the variables accurately and applied sufficient force to the right points. He looked at the White Death problem and identified the key variable. The shooter required a physical environment to operate in. Remove the environment and the problem disappears. Lebedev presented his proposal to the division colonel. "We cannot find this sniper. He relocates too quickly. He cannot be ambushed. I propose a different approach. Artillery saturation, 500 shells per day for 12 days. Remove all cover. It makes sniping in that sector operationally impossible." The colonel asked about cost. 180,000 rubles. "Approved," the colonel said. "Anything to stop White Death." On February 20th at 10 in the morning, Soviet artillery began the bombardment. 122mm howitzers. The shells came in continuous waves. The forest did not burn in the -40 temperature. It shattered. The concussive force of each impact turned birch trunks into fragmented wood, turned spruce into broken stumps. The snow turned black with dirt and ash. The sound was constant, rolling thunder that filled the forest with noise that had no direction. Esko was not there. He had observed Soviet artillery crews positioning the howitzers the previous afternoon. He recognized the process. He knew what was coming. He had relocated 800 meters south before the first shell fell. From his new position, he adapted immediately. The artillery noise covered the sound of his rifle completely. Soviet soldiers moving in the bombardment zone could not hear a Mosin Nagant firing over the continuous thunder of howitzer rounds. Esko used the bombardment as cover. He killed 18 Soviet soldiers during the 4 hours the artillery fired on his previous operational area. The Soviet soldiers died without any of them understanding that the sniper they were trying to destroy with artillery was using the sound of that artillery to kill them. Lebedev received the casualty reports that evening. 18 kills during the bombardment from a different sector. He ordered the bombardment doubled for the following day. 1,000 shells, 8 hours. If February 21st was the coldest day of the Winter War, -45 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, exposed skin turns white and begins to die in minutes. Metal becomes adhesive to bare flesh. Rifle bolts that have not been kept warm seize and will not cycle. Soviet soldiers in their brown winter uniforms moved through what remained of the forest like men fighting against the air itself. Brown uniforms against white snow. Visible at 500 meters, Esko extended his engagement range to 350 to 450 meters. Longer range meant Soviet return fire was less accurate. At 400 meters, bullet drop was 22 inches. Wind drift at 12 miles per hour was 9 inches. Both had to be compensated simultaneously in real time for a potentially moving target. 14 years of shooting elk had made the calculation instinctive. Between 6:30 in the morning and 6 in the evening, Esko killed 63 Soviet soldiers. 4 major engagements, 7 minor contacts, 78 rounds fired, 63 confirmed kills, 81% accuracy at extended range, in the coldest conditions of the war, after 52 consecutive days of combat with an average of less than 2 hours of sleep per day. To put that number in context, the average sniper in the Second World War achieved approximately 0.8 confirmed kills per day. Esko Makinen on February 21st, 1940, achieved 63. He was operating at 78 times the average rate. He was doing this alone, without a spotter, without radio contact, without any of the support infrastructure that modern military doctrine considers essential for sustained sniper operations. He was doing it on cracked and bleeding hands, with split lips, half-starved, running on less than 2 hours of sleep a night, in the coldest weather the Finnish winter had produced in years. It was the highest single-day kill count of his career. It would remain the highest. No sniper in the history of documented warfare has matched it in a single day under verified conditions. He returned to finish lines at 8 in the evening. His hands were bleeding, cracked from the extreme cold, deep cracks that opened with movement and would not close. His lips were split and swollen. He could not eat solid food without pain that made his eyes water. He had lost 8 pounds in 7 days. But he walked into the finished position and sat down on an ammunition crate and did not move for several minutes. Captain Korhonen looked at him for a long moment, the cracked hands, the split lips, the hollowed quality around the eyes. He told Esko he did not need to go out tomorrow, ordered him to rest. Esko shook his head. "I will go out." Korhonen did not argue. He had learned not to argue with Esko Makinen about things like this. The man had his own logic, his own accounting of what was required, and that accounting did not include rest when there were Soviet soldiers in the Kola sector who had not been killed yet. 400 meters away, in a Soviet observation position, Vasily Nikitin had watched the day through binoculars from 800 meters. He had watched patrols enter the forest, had heard the single shots, spaced at intervals of minutes, had watched the soldiers fall, had not once, seen the shooter. He wrote that night, "Today I watched something I have no honest way to describe. One man killed 63 Soviet soldiers in 12 hours. I observed from 800 meters. I heard the shots. I saw the soldiers fall. I did not see the shooter, not once. This is not combat. This is something else." Then he wrote the words that would stay in his journal until it was found on his body 2 days later. "Tomorrow I am ordered to lead a patrol into that sector. I have written a letter to Irina. I have told her that I love her. I have told her to tell Anna and Maria about their father, what kind of man he tried to be. I do not say this out of weakness. And I say it because I have been honest in this journal since I began it, and I will be honest now. I do not expect to return from tomorrow's patrol." He closed the journal, looked at the photograph. Anna, 8 years old, squinting into the Moscow summer sun with the serious expression she wore in photographs because she had decided that smiling in photographs was undignified. Maria, 5, grinning enormously, a gap where her front tooth had been. Vasily put the photograph back in his coat pocket, turned down the lamp, lay back on his cot in the dark. He was not afraid exactly. He had been in situations before where he had assessed his odds of survival as poor and had made his peace with the assessment and gone forward anyway. That was the job. That was what soldiers did. That you went forward because someone had to go forward and you were the one who was there. What he felt was something closer to regret, not for his own life specifically, for the incompleteness of things. Anna was 8, Maria was 5. There were years he would not see. A daughter's graduation, a wedding, maybe 2. Grandchildren whose faces he would never know. He thought about Irina, who would have to explain this to 2 girls who were not yet old enough to understand that fathers could simply stop existing. He thought about the practical difficulties of her situation, the pension forms, the school fees, the 1,000 small problems that 2 people manage together that one person has to manage alone. He had loved her for 11 years. He was sorry to leave her with all of that. He went to sleep thinking about a summer afternoon in Moscow. Irina beside him on a bench in Gorky Park, the girls running ahead of them on the path, the light on the water, the specific, irreplaceable warmth of that ordinary afternoon that he had not known at the time to memorize more carefully. February 23rd. The forest that had once covered this sector of the Kola River Valley was largely gone. What remained was a landscape of stumps and craters and shattered wood, the snow black and churned. No natural cover anywhere tall enough to hide a standing man. It looked, as one Soviet officer had written in his report the previous day, like the surface of the moon. All the artillery, all the shells, all the 180,000 rubles Lebedev had spent trying to make this ground unsurvivable for one Finnish farmer. And what they had produced was a lunar wasteland that the Finnish farmer was still operating in, while 200 Soviet soldiers who had been sent to stop him lay dead in it. Vasily led his patrol into this landscape at 6:30 in the morning. 16 men, all experienced, all carrying scoped rifles, all briefed on White Death's known techniques. Vasily had not slept well. He had lain on his cot in the dark and thought about Irina and the girls and the summer afternoon in Gorky Park. And at some point before dawn, he had stopped pretending he was going to sleep and had sat up and read through his journal entries from the previous 3 weeks by the light of a match. He read his own analysis back to himself. One man, one method, one mind. He had been right about that. He had been the only one on the Soviet side who had understood the truth of what they were dealing with, and understanding it had not helped him find a solution. He closed the journal, put it in his coat pocket with the photograph, went out to brief his patrol. He told them one thing beyond the standard briefing. He knows this ground better than we do. Don't go to the places that look like good cover. He knows those places. Move unpredictably. Don't follow the routes that feel natural. The natural route is where he expects you. The patrol moved through the destroyed forest in loose formation, spread out, using what cover remained. Vasily moved with them, watching, scanning, his scope sweeping the ground ahead in slow, methodical arcs. At 6:45, he saw it. A slight depression in the snow, at 340 meters to the northeast. Wrong shape. The snow around it was fractionally too disturbed, in the way that a body lying in the snow for several hours compresses and displaces it differently than wind or the natural settling of snowfall. It was a small thing, almost nothing. A man who had been watching for it for 3 weeks, who had been building in his mind a picture of what a hidden shooter looked like in this specific terrain, who had read the pattern correctly from the very first day and never been wrong about the fundamental assessment, would recognize it. Vasily was that man. He raised his binoculars, looked at the depression, found the secondary indicator, the slight misalignment of a snow-covered shape with the natural geometry of the ground around it. He had found him, after 3 weeks. And after the ambush that failed, and the bombardment that failed, and 43 dead, counter-sniper specialists who had been sent before him. He had found White Death. He raised his scope and began to move his aim point toward the depression. That was all the time he had. Esko fired. The bullet crossed 340 meters in less than half a second. It entered Vasily's chest and destroyed his heart and severed his descending aorta. He was dead before his body understood what had happened. Dead before the sound of the shot reached the patrol. Dead in the way that the best shooters always try to kill, instantaneously and completely, without suffering, without the slow, terrible process of a man understanding that he is dying. He fell forward into the black snow. The photograph of Irina and Anna and Maria fell from his coat pocket and landed in the snow beside his outstretched hand. 2 girls squinting into a Moscow summer, their father dead in a Finnish forest 3,000 kilometers from home. The journal in his other pocket containing his own correct analysis of the thing that had just killed him. He had been right about everything. He had understood the truth from the first day, and being right had not been enough. The patrol returned fire. 200 rounds in 30 seconds directed at the depression in the snow. Esko had already relocated 80 meters west. From his new position, he fired 4 more times before the patrol withdrew. 4 more soldiers fell. The patrol carried Vasily's body back to their lines and filed a report that used words like extraordinary threat and recommend sector abandonment. 7 days, February 17th through February 23rd, 1940, 200 Soviet soldiers killed, an average of 28.6 per day. The Soviet 155th Rifle Division's February 24th report. Sector 7 casualties, 7-day period, killed in action 200, wounded in action 73, missing in action 12. Morale assessment, critically degraded. Discipline maintained only through threat of punitive action. Recommend withdrawal from Kala sector. The recommendation was denied. 200 letters went out, form letters, 3 words each. Killed in action, 200 mothers, 200 wives. Hid 200 sets of children who would spend years learning to tell the story of a father who went to Finland and never came home. Irina Nikitin received hers on March 2nd. She was in the apartment on the third floor in Moscow when the courier delivered the notice. She stood in the hallway and read it twice. Then she sat down on the floor because her legs would not carry her to a chair. Anna found her there 20 minutes later and did not understand. Not fully, not yet. Maria found them both and began to cry because Anna was crying. Irina sat on the hallway floor with her daughters and held them and did not explain because there was no explanation that worked for a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, not today. Today was just the floor of the hallway and her daughters in her arms and the piece of paper that said 3 words. WWII, the man who had written her the letter she would carry in her coat for the rest of the winter, was already dead. The man who had killed him was still in the forest, still waiting, still invisible, still alive. March 6, 1940. Day 98 of the Winter War. The forest that Esko had hunted through since December was mostly gone. Lebedev's artillery had finished what it started. What remained was a landscape of stumps and craters and black snow. The terrain looked like something had been angry at it, like the earth itself had been punished for sheltering Finnish soldiers. Esko had adapted. The craters became positions. The stumps became reference points. The black churned snow still held information if you knew how to read it. He moved differently now, lower, slower, using the crater edges for cover. I'm operating only in the gray light of early morning and late afternoon when visibility was poorest. His kill rate had dropped from 4.7 per day to 2.8, but 2.8 per day was still more than any other single soldier in the sector was achieving. And he was still there, still operating, still alive on a battlefield that had killed 237 Soviet soldiers sent specifically to find him. At 6:15 in the morning, he settled into position in a shell crater 290 meters from the nearest Soviet patrol route. He had chosen it the previous evening, walking the ground at dusk, lying down in different craters to assess sight lines and angles. He had identified 3 possible withdrawal paths and committed each one to memory. In darkness, under fire, with blood in his eyes, he would need to know those paths without thinking. He cleared the snow from in front of his muzzle, packed the crater edge around his position, placed snow in his mouth. He waited. At 6:32, a Soviet hunter patrol appeared at the eastern edge of the destroyed zone. 6 soldiers. He recognized the difference immediately from how they moved, the spacing between men, the way each one's eyes were doing something specific rather than the general forward scan of standard infantry. These were trained anti-sniper hunters. They had been briefed. They knew what to look for. They moved carefully through the crater field, covering all quadrants simultaneously. They were good. The range was 320 meters, longer than Esko preferred in these conditions. The wind was coming from the northwest at 12 miles per hour, shifting slightly at irregular intervals. He had made this calculation 10,000 times. In competition, in hunting, in 97 days of war. He exhaled slowly, waited for the wind to settle into a consistent direction. Watched the lead soldier move into a position where the sightline was clean. The moment lasted 2 seconds. Esko fired. The lead soldier fell. What happened next was different from anything that had happened in 97 previous days. The remaining 5 soldiers did not scatter, did not panic, did not fire in random directions. They dropped simultaneously into covered positions with the coordinated speed of trained professionals and began returning fire immediately. Not wildfire, not panic fire. Disciplined, aimed, rapid fire directed at the area from which the shot had come. They had seen something. Whatever it was, they had it. 40 rounds impacted near his position in 15 seconds. The accuracy was extraordinary. Rounds hit within inches on multiple sides. The crater edge to his left disintegrated. Snow and dirt rained down on him. He was pinned. Every time he calculated a movement vector, more rounds arrived from a slightly adjusted angle, as if the Soviet soldiers were walking their fire toward him with methodical precision. He could not move. The fire was too heavy and too accurate. He had been in 97 days of combat, and this had never happened. At 6:33, a Soviet bullet found him. It entered his left cheek and traveled through his jaw. It shattered 6 teeth. The hydrostatic shock wave from the bullet's passage tore tissue throughout his lower face. It exited through his right cheek. taking with it pieces of bone and tooth and the organized structure that had been his jaw. Blood filled his mouth and began filling his throat. He was choking on his own blood. The pain was immediate and total, a white, complete erasure of everything except the fact of the damage. His vision narrowed. One thought arrived with absolute clarity through all of it. Move now or die here. He left his rifle. First time in 98 days. The Mosin Nagant M28/30 stayed in the crater. He began to crawl. 290 meters to finish lines. He moved on his elbows and knees through the black snow, keeping his profile below the crater rim, moving through the shell-torn landscape that he had memorized the previous evening. He could not see clearly. Blood ran from his face and dripped steadily into the snow, leaving a trail that was bright red against white, a line as clear and readable as a highway, pointing directly at him. The Soviet patrol saw the blood trail. They advanced. Esko crawled 50 meters in 2 minutes. The pain did not decrease. His vision continued to narrow. He was losing blood faster than was sustainable. He had approximately 240 meters to cover. He crawled. At 6:37, Finnish machine gunners on the defensive line saw the blood trail in the gray morning light, saw the figure crawling through the craters, saw the Soviet patrol advancing. 2 Maxim machine guns opened fire simultaneously. 1,200 rounds per minute combined, sustained fire laid across the approach path of the Soviet patrol. The rounds impacted close enough that the soldiers dove for cover and could not advance. Finnish soldiers ran forward from the defensive line, reached Esko at 6:39, grabbed him, dragged him back. The Soviets withdrew. At the regimental aid station, a medic looked at Esko's face for 3 seconds and called for the surgeon. Left mandible destroyed, right mandible fractured, 6 teeth absent, tongue severely lacerated, soft tissue damage extensive, airway compromised. They could not clear his airway through his mouth. They cut his throat. A field cricothyrotomy, an incision below the larynx, a tube inserted directly into the trachea. He breathed through the tube, barely enough. They loaded him onto a vehicle heading 15 kilometers behind the lines to a field hospital. Surgeons operated for 6 hours. They debrided destroyed tissue, set the fractures that could be set, sutured what could be sutured. They could not reconstruct his jaw yet. They focused on keeping him alive. The operation succeeded. 8 millimeters. The bullet had passed 8 millimeters from his carotid artery. If the carotid had been severed, he would have been dead before the Finnish soldiers reached him. 8 millimeters was the distance between Esko Makinen living to be 96 years old and becoming one more entry in a Soviet casualty report. 8 millimeters was the distance between a headstone that said soldier and a form letter that said killed in action. The man who had survived 97 days of war by being invisible, by being patient, by being faster than anyone sent to kill him, had been saved in the end not by skill, but by the random geometry of a single bullet's path through his face. War does this. War is the place where skill and preparation and everything you have learned over a lifetime collides with pure, random chance. And sometimes chance wins, and sometimes it does not. And the difference between those two outcomes is not always 8 millimeters, but it is always small enough to be humbling. March 13, 1940. 1 week after Esko was shot, Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Peace Treaty. The Winter War ended at 11 o'clock. Finnish soldiers in the defensive positions along the Kala River heard the ceasefire and stood up from trenches they had occupied for more than 3 months. And many of them did not know what to do with the sudden silence. The silence was enormous. It had a texture and a weight after months of artillery and rifle fire and the sounds of men dying in the cold. Finland had survived as an independent nation. The Soviet Union had not taken Finland. The Red Army, which the entire world had expected to overrun 300,000 Finnish soldiers in 1 week, had spent 3 months fighting and dying in Finnish forests for territory it could not hold completely and a victory it could not fully claim. Finnish casualties, 70,000 total, 25,900 dead. Soviet casualties, 321,000 total, 126,875 dead, an exchange ratio of nearly 5 to 1. But the peace terms required Finland to cede 11% of its territory. Esko learned the details from a nurse in the field hospital on the afternoon of March 13th. She read him the terms from a newspaper. Hi, he could not speak clearly yet. His jaw was wired. He listened. Karelia, the Karelian Isthmus, the territory near the Soviet border, the farms and forests and villages of hundreds of thousands of Finnish citizens who now had to leave everything and move west. Then the nurse said a name without knowing what it meant to him. It was on the list. A village of 380 people, one general store, one Lutheran church. 30 kilometers from the Russian border. Population to be evacuated. Territory transferred to the Soviet Union effective immediately. Hürtgen, the farm his father had rented for 30 years. The forest where he had learned to shoot at age 6. The trails he had walked 4,000 times over 14 years, until he knew them the way most men know the rooms of their own house. The creek that ran behind the east field that froze in October and thawed in May. The Lutheran church where 3 generations of Mackinnons had sat in the same pew on Sunday mornings. The clearing where he had shot his first elk. The ridge where he had lain motionless for 4 hours at age 16, waiting for a deer to move. Learning the patience that would one day make him the most dangerous single soldier in the Winter War. All of its Soviet territory now. He had spent 98 days in the Kola forest, killing Soviet soldiers to protect Finland from Soviet occupation. He had killed 542 of them. He had been shot in the face and lost his jaw, and survived by 8 millimeters. And the ground he had been fighting to protect was gone anyway. This is the part the history books mention in a sentence. This is the part that deserves more than a sentence. Because what happened to Esko Mackinnon in March 1940 is something that American veterans of Korea and Vietnam understand in a way that most people do not. The men who came home from the Chosin Reservoir came home to a country that had moved on. The men who came home from Vietnam came home to protests in silence and a war that the country wanted to forget before the last helicopter had left the roof. They had done their duty, they had paid the full price. And they came home to find that what they had paid for was not what they had been promised. The math of sacrifice does not always balance. You give everything, and sometimes what you get back is not what you gave everything for. Esko Mackinnon understood this without anyone explaining it to him. In a hospital bed in March 1940, Issa listening to a nurse read a list of surrendered Finnish territory that contained the name of the only home he had ever known. He lay there with his jaw wired shut and his face reconstructed in pieces, and his hands bandaged against the cold damage that had cracked them open. And he understood something that does not have a clean resolution and does not lead to a lesson you can summarize in a sentence. That the thing you fight for and the thing you get are not always the same thing. That doing your duty completely and correctly does not guarantee that duty will be rewarded. That a man can give 98 days and 542 lives and the full use of his face and still come home to find that the farm where his father taught him to shoot belongs to the country he spent those 98 days fighting against. He said nothing. There was nothing to say, and he had never been a man who spoke when there was nothing to say. The rifle was recovered the same day Esko was shot. Finnish soldiers who ran forward to extract him found it in the crater, half buried in disturbed snow. They picked it up, brought it back. Serial number 60974. The stock had blood on it. Esko's blood from his cracked hands, from weeks of cold that had split his skin. The rifle was assigned to another Finnish sniper for the remaining weeks of the Winter War. That sniper used it well, added 37 more confirmed kills to its history. After the war, it was returned to the Saco factory where it had been manufactured in 1928. The original barrel was worn smooth from firing more than 10,000 rounds. They replaced it. From 1945 onward, the rifle served at the Finnish Army Sniper School as a training weapon. Thousands of students learned marksmanship with it, held the same stock Esko had held, looked through the same iron sights. In 1988, the Finnish Army donated it to the Finnish Military Museum in Helsinki. It is displayed there today in a climate-controlled case in the Winter War section. The label describes the rifle, the caliber, the manufacture date. It lists 542 confirmed kills. Visitors stand in front of the case and look at an ordinary rifle and try to understand how it became the deadliest single weapon one man ever carried into combat. The answer is not in the case. The answer is in everything that happened before the rifle was ever pointed at another human being. A boy in a cold forest? A fallen log to rest a barrel on? One sentence from a father who did not believe in wasted words. If you miss the shot, the family eats less this week. Three people whose lives intersected with Esco's followed separate paths through the decades that followed. Alexei Sorokin's mother, Daria, was 62 years old in Kharkiv when the letter arrived in March 1940. She read it and folded it and put it in a wooden box with the last letter Alexei had sent home. The one where he said not to worry, that he had a warm coat. She kept that box on the shelf above her bed for 50 years. In 1987, a Soviet journalist came to interview her for a retrospective on the Winter War. She was 89 years old. He asked if she had ever learned how her son died. No, she said. The letter said killed in action. I asked the army. They said he died honorably, no details. For 47 years I wondered, was he brave? Did he suffer? Did he have time to think of me? The journalist told her, your son was killed by a Finnish sniper. Single bullet. Death was instant. He did not suffer. She was quiet. Then she said, I do not hate this Finnish man. He was a soldier like Alexei. War killed my son, not the man who pulled the trigger. Stalin started the war. Soldiers died. That is how war works. The journalist asked, do you forgive him? She said, there is nothing to forgive. He did his duty. Alexei did his duty. Both were farmers who learned to shoot. Both were sent to kill each other. One lived, one died. That is war. Daria Sorokina died in 1990. She never learned that the Finnish farmer's name was Esko. She never knew that Alexei had been killed number 390 out of 542. She never knew that one man had killed her son and 199 others in 7 days. She only knew that her son had gone to a forest in Finland and not come back, and that she had been given 3 words to explain it. Irina Nikitin raised her daughters alone in the Moscow apartment. Anna and Maria grew up knowing their father had died in Finland in 1940. Irina told them he had been a good soldier and a good man. In 2002, she was reading the newspaper when she saw the obituary. A Finnish war veteran, the deadliest sniper in history. 542 confirmed kills. Winter War, Kala sector. She looked at the dates. February 1940. Kala sector. Vasily had died February 23, 1940 in the Kala sector. Leading a patrol against a sniper position. She sat with the newspaper for a long time. A journalist came to interview her a week later, asked how she felt, knowing the name of the man who had killed her husband. She said, I do not hate Esko Makinen. I hate Stalin. Stalin started the war. Stalin sent Vasily to invade another country. Vasily was a good soldier and he followed his orders, and his orders took him to a forest in Finland where a better man was waiting. If the positions had been reversed, Vasily would have done the same thing. You defend your country. You kill the men who come to take it. That is what soldiers do. Then she paused, and she said, Vasily knew. He was the only one on their side who understood what they were facing. He was too good a soldier not to know what the odds were, and he went anyway. Because that was his duty, and he was a man who did his duty. She closed the newspaper carefully and set it on the table. That was all she had to say. Lebedev, the artillery officer who had spent 180,000 rubles trying to destroy the forest and failed to kill the man inside it, survived both the Winter War and the continuation war that followed in 1941. He was promoted twice. He married in 1943. His wife was a teacher in Leningrad. They had one son. In 1949, Stalin's post-war purges reached into the military bureaucracy and found Lebedev. The charge was anti-Soviet activities. The evidence was vague and possibly non-existent, assembled by someone with a quota to fill or a grievance to settle, or simply the random, malignant attention of a system that needed enemies to justify itself. He was executed in Lubyanka prison on November 3, 1949. He was 37 years old. He had spent 180,000 rubles, destroyed 2 square kilometers of Finnish forest, and failed to kill one Finnish farmer. He had survived that failure, survived 2 wars. He had come home, built a life, and been killed by his own government 9 years after the war ended. In 1941, Finland entered the continuation war against the Soviet Union, fighting to recover the territory lost in the Moscow Peace Treaty. Esko wanted to serve. The army refused him. His injuries were documented as too severe for combat duty. His jaw had been partially reconstructed through 3 additional surgeries. Bone grafts from his hip, realignment, reconstruction, scar tissue that pulled the left side of his face inward in a way that no surgery had been able to fully correct. His face was permanently changed. He could speak with care. He could eat slowly. He would never look the way he had looked before March 6, 1940. He was assigned to training duties instead. And this, in the long accounting of what Esko Makinen contributed to Finland's survival, may have mattered more than the 542 kills. Because a man who kills 542 enemies and then dies has done something extraordinary. A man who kills 542 enemies and then teaches his methods to a generation of young shooters multiplies that number beyond calculation. He taught marksmanship to new snipers, taught camouflage, taught fieldcraft, taught patience, which was the hardest thing to teach because it looked like nothing from the outside, because it required a complete internal discipline that could not be demonstrated or commanded, only modeled and waited for. His students asked about his techniques. He demonstrated. Iron sights, consistent positioning, breath control, the snow and mouth method, which every student found strange and every student adopted within a week after they understood why. The single-shot relocation principle, the pre-planned escape route, the terrain memorization practice. He taught them the thing his father had taught him, the thing that sat underneath all the techniques and made them work. See what is there, not what you expect to see. Finnish snipers trained under his methods in the continuation war averaged 2.3 confirmed kills per day, mile higher than any other nation's snipers, higher than the Germans, who were considered the best in Europe. The methods worked because they were true, because they had been forged in 14 years of real stakes hunting before they were ever applied to war, because they came from a place that was not theory but necessity. After the continuation war ended in 1944, Esko returned to farming. The government had compensated displaced Karelian families with land elsewhere in Finland. He received 50 acres in Ruokolahti, 80 kilometers west of Rutjärvi. He built a small house, planted rye in May, harvested in September, hunted occasionally, though not the way he had hunted in his youth. The forests near Ruokolahti were good forests, honest Finnish forests, but they were not his. He lived quietly. He did not marry. He did not seek recognition. When journalists found him and asked about the 542 kills, about White Death, he said the same thing each time. I did what was necessary, nothing more. It was not false modesty. It was an accurate description of how he understood what he had done. He had been a Finnish soldier in a defensive war. His country had been invaded. He had been the person available with the skills required. He had used those skills until he was unable to continue. The numbers were large because the war was long, and his skills were extensive, and the Soviets kept sending soldiers into a forest he knew better than they would ever know it. In 1998, at age 93, he agreed to one interview with a Finnish historian who had been writing to him for several years. And the historian drove to Ruokolahti and sat across from an old man in a simple kitchen with a window that looked out on 50 acres of Finnish farmland, the same farmland where Esko had been planting rye in May and harvesting in September since 1944. The historian had a recorder and a notebook full of prepared questions. He used most of them. Esko answered with the economy he brought to everything, brief, specific, without decoration. Near the end of the interview, the historian asked, "Do you regret killing 542 men?" Esko was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I regret that the war happened. I regret that men died. I do not regret my actions. Soviet soldiers had invaded Finland. They would have killed Finns. I stopped them. That was my duty." The historian asked, "Do you think about them, the individual men?" And there was a longer pause than usual. Esko said, "I think about them the way a farmer thinks about a difficult harvest. The work was necessary. You did it. You carry it. You don't talk about it every day, but it's there. It doesn't go away." He paused again. Then he said something quietly, almost to himself, that the historian almost did not catch on the recording. "I remember every one of them." The historian asked, "What do you mean?" Esko shook his head. That was all he would say. The interview was over. The historian drove back to Helsinki with his recorder and his notebook and spent a long time thinking about what it meant to carry 542 faces in your memory for 60 years and never talk about it and never let anyone know you were carrying them. What it cost. What shape it gave to a long, quiet life spent farming and hunting and attending church and not giving interviews. Sniper schools in a dozen countries study Esko Makinen today. Fort Benning, Georgia, the British Royal Marines, Russian military academies that teach his methods despite the fact that he killed 542 Russian soldiers using them. Israeli Defense Forces counter-sniper programs. They study him because his record has never been broken, because the principles he developed in a Finnish forest in 1939 remain valid in every terrain, in every conflict, and every generation that has come since. Patience overcomes technology. Simplicity beats complexity. Know your ground better than the enemy knows it. Fire once and move. Be invisible before the first shot and be gone before the second. His record has never been approached. The next highest confirmed sniper total in history belongs to a Soviet marksman who accumulated approximately 500 kills, but over 4 years of combat. Esko did it in 98 days. If you project his rate across a full year, the mathematics produce a number so large it strains comprehension. But Esko did not operate for a full year. He operated for 98 days, and then a bullet found him, and the war ended 9 days after that. And the numbers stopped where they stopped. 542. That number will almost certainly never be exceeded under verified conditions. The nature of modern warfare, with its technology and surveillance, and the changed character of infantry combat, makes the conditions that produced Esko Makinen essentially unrepeatable. Not only he was a product of a specific time in a specific place, and a specific sequence of experiences that began with a cracked rifle and a father who did not believe in wasted words. You cannot manufacture those conditions. You cannot train them into someone. You can only recognize them when they exist and then get out of the way. These are not complex ideas. They are not the product of formal military education or advanced tactical training. They are what a boy from a small village learned hunting elk with a cracked rifle in order to feed his family through a Finnish winter. Esko Makinen died April 1st, 2002. He was 96 years old. He had outlived the Soviet Union, which collapsed in 1991. He had outlived the Cold War. He died peacefully in a veterans nursing home in Hamina, Finland, on a morning in early spring when the snow was beginning to melt and the first pale light was coming back into the Finnish sky. His funeral was attended by 300 people, veterans, politicians, journalists who had spent years trying to get him to talk. The president of Finland sent condolences. His former students came from across Finland to stand at his grave. He was buried in Ruokolahti in a simple grave in the Lutheran churchyard. The headstone was cut from Finnish granite. It gave his name, his birth date, his death date, and one word: soldier, not hero, not legend, not the deadliest sniper in history, not White Death, just soldier. One word for a man who had never used more words than necessary to say what needed saying. 542 Soviet families received letters in the winter and spring of 1940. Reform letters, 3 words each. None of them knew the name of the man who had killed their sons and husbands and fathers. None of them knew he was 5 feet 3 inches tall and had learned to shoot when he was 6 years old because his family needed to eat. None of them knew he had refused telescopic sights and won national championships anyway. None of them knew he had memorized every tree in a forest they would never visit. None of them knew he had lain in the cold for 4 and 6 and 8 hours at a time, breathing slowly, waiting with the patience of a man who had grown up understanding that the shot would come if you were still enough and quiet enough and willing to wait for it. They only knew what 3 words could tell them, which was nothing except the fact of an absence that would last the rest of their lives. That is what war does with the men it uses. It sends them into forests and fields and cities. Some come home, some do not. The ones who do not come home become paperwork become letters, become the shape of an empty chair at a table that never fully stops being associated with the person who used to sit in it. They become the question that families carry for decades. Was he brave? Did he suffer? Did he think of us at the end? Most of the time, the families never get an answer. Most of the time, 3 words are all they are given, and 3 words have to be enough, and they are never enough. Esko Mäkinen came home, not to the home he had known, not to WWII, not to the forest he had spent his life learning, not to the land his father had farmed, and his grandfather before that. That home was gone, but he came back to Finland, so to a new piece of Finnish ground, to 50 acres in Ruokolahti, where he planted rye in May and harvested in September, and lived quietly for nearly 60 years after the war ended, without saying much about any of it. He had done his duty. He had done it at a cost that no number accurately measures and no headstone fully describes. One word in granite: soldier, a farmer who learned to shoot so his family could eat, a man who never wanted to kill anyone, who killed 542 because history required it of him, and he was the person available with the skills to do it, a man who remembered every one of them, who said so only once and would not say more, who crawled 290 meters through blood-stained snow to survive, who lost his jaw and his home and the forest that made him and kept going anyway, who outlived the empire that tried to take his country. Consider what that means, to outlive the empire. The Soviet Union that deployed 1 million soldiers against Finland in November 1939, that killed 25,000 Finnish men and lost over 126,000 of its own, that took WWII and the Karelian Isthmus and the specific piece of Finnish earth where Esko Mäkinen had learned everything he knew. That empire no longer exists. It collapsed under its own contradictions in 1991, 51 years after it sent Alexei Sorokin into a forest to find White Death. The countries it controlled are independent. The ideology it imposed is discredited. The system that executed Lebedev for nothing in 1949 has been judged by history with the clarity that only time provides. Finland is still there. The same Lutheran churches, the same rye fields in May, the same forests where Finnish men learn to shoot and wait and be patient and see what is there rather than what they expect to see. Esko Mäkinen was buried in one of those forests in April 2002 in a simple grave with a granite headstone, and the headstone says one word: soldier. Not hero, not legend, not the deadliest sniper in history, not White Death, not the man who terrified an army of 1 million with a rifle that cost 200 Finnish marks and had no telescopic sight. Just soldier, the word he would have chosen if anyone had thought to ask him, the word that covered everything without explaining any of it, the way the best words do. He proved something in those 98 days that every soldier and every veteran and every person who has ever been asked to do something difficult at great personal cost already knows in their bones, but rarely hears said plainly, that the hunter who cannot be seen cannot be killed, that patience is not passive, that simplicity, practiced to perfection, defeats complexity every time, that the things you learn because you have to learn them, because the alternative is going hungry or watching your country fall, are the things that stay with you longest and go deepest and ultimately define what you are capable of when everything is on the line. That one man in the right place, with the right preparation, with the right understanding of the ground beneath his feet, can matter more than 1,000 men without those things. That armies do not win wars. Men win wars. Individual men in individual moments, making individual decisions that the army's orders and the army's doctrine and the army's numbers did not and could not predict. Esko Mäkinen was one of those men. He was a farmer from a village that didn't appear on most maps, and he changed the course of a battle that the entire world had already decided was lost before it started. The Soviet Union sent 1 million soldiers. Finland had one Esko Mäkinen. In 98 days in a cold forest, those two facts produced the same result as if Finland had had 2 million soldiers and the Soviets had had none. That is what skill does at its absolute ceiling. That is what preparation does when it has been conducted honestly and consistently for an entire lifetime. And that is what a boy learns when his father hands him a rifle and says, If you miss the shot, the family eats less this week, and that the cost of survival is carried quietly in the places below words for the rest of a life.